The New York Times reported very recently an article that 64% of people disapprove of our involvement in Iran. I would think, if I was a representative on the Hill, that if 64% of my constituents didn't like what I was doing on a major issue that is causing mass inflation, getting their sons and daughters killed, maimed, ruining our reputation internationally, on and on and on, that it would be taken note of and had, there would be a pivot away from it. Let's be just blunt about it. They would use their authority within the legislature to bring this to an end and to send a message, because not only is it against the will of Americans and their interests, but there's also probably a lot of political mileage to be made out of that, yet it's not happening. And you have been reporting very accurately throughout the entire duration of this about the next round, or that it was kicking off. And I believe in that same article, it appears that DOD does not want to go back to war, because the Air Force has become, rather plug and chug, if you will, in terms of their tactics and doctrine on the ground, and adjustments have been made. So what do you think the probability of us going back after the Iranians is, and are we going to see something different on our end, or is this adjustment going to make us pay?
Well, let's look at two dimensions here. One is, let's look at the American military establishment. You cannot build, regardless of how rich you are or how ostensibly powerful you are, you cannot build a military establishment that is all things to all people. You can't make one size fit all. Now, we try to do that to some extent, but it's just not attainable. And people forget, the German military, arguably during the Second World War, was perhaps better than anything else that existed, may have been a unique military establishment for history, who knows. But it was not capable of doing everything.
Right.
It was only a certain size, given the size of the population. They could only train and equip so many people. And so they launched operations in the West, which were very successful because that fit the paradigm. That was something for which they were designed and could execute. Then suddenly, almost without warning, they are directed to invade the Soviet Union. And quite frankly, virtually every four-star equivalent at the top of the German army said, don't do this. They did. Privately, they said, no, this is not going to work. The Soviet Union's too big. There are no gas stations and good roads in the Soviet Union. Most of our logistics is still horse-drawn. And in an attempt to mollify Hitler at the time, some said, well, in another year or two, with more mechanization and motorization, perhaps, but not now. And by the way, we only have about 4,800 aircraft. You're going to need all of those aircraft in the Soviet Union. We can't afford to leave anything in the West, and we are not finished in the West. There is still a war in the West. All of this was ignored. Now, what was the outcome? Well, it was failure. Was it a failure because of anything? No, absolutely not. No one could have fought harder and more effectively than the average German soldier or the people commanding him. Now, there were mistakes, but I'm just saying on the whole, you couldn't have asked for better. Well, what about us? What are we doing in the Indian Ocean, in the Persian Gulf? We're not designed to crack open the Persian Gulf any more than the British Army was designed and the British Navy to crack open the Dardanelles in 1915. They tried for 9 months with over 500,000 troops. It failed. It didn't work. We're trapped in the same mess. Now, we're not even involved, in my judgment, in a real war for American interests. Now, the British were involved in World War I for what they thought were their strategic interests, but they were unprepared to land troops 50, 100, 200 miles away and then try to march in to Constantinople in order to circumvent the Dardanelles. That couldn't be done. So they ended up going down through the desert, coming out of Egypt, and coming through Mesopotamia, as we know. But we're not involved in that sort of war. We also don't have 1 million men under arms in the army or the ground force. We're not about to draft in order to fill out a ground force like that. If you want to bring this war to a quick end, all you have to do is announce the draft. And you'll have people all over the country in the streets that don't want to serve in the armed forces, and you'll put an end to the war. So what are we doing? We're taking a force that was designed really to fight in the Cold War. It was an improved version of the World War II armed forces with better stuff. But that's not what we face in Iran. Iran is an entirely different animal. In addition to being a geological, topographical fortress surrounded by some of the highest mountains in the world, with impassable deserts on its southern border, which are right around 140 degrees every day right now. Wonderful experience if you're in the Navy or sitting at sea. God help them down there. I mean, it's awful. My son, who went to Annapolis, talked about it. It was terrible. So, what are you going to do? You're doing the best you can. You're launching whatever you can from wherever you can. And in the meantime, the enemy has figured out that if you create automatic targeting data links between space-based surveillance, which is persistent, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that you can target and effectively take under fire or destroy just about anything out there that's within 300 to 500 miles of your border, in some cases further. Mm-hmm. So are you going to have a sneak attack anytime soon out of the Arabian Peninsula? No. If you try to do it, you're going to be identified, and some tactical or theater ballistic missiles or other kinds of unmanned systems will against you. And what have we found out? The enemy has built thousands and thousands of these missiles. They have an estimated 25,000 missiles, maybe more. Now they've received a new consignment of Chinese and Russian radars and air defense missiles and long-range cruise missiles. In fact, cruise missiles that are designed to attack capital ships at sea. Now, they're probably at this point, I would suspect, manned by Chinese and Russian technicians. I'd be very surprised if they weren't. And people on the Hill say, well, that's outrageous. How can that happen? Well, maybe you ought to catch up with current events, because we've been doing this in Ukraine from the very beginning in 20.
Absolutely.
So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, my friend. You know, you don't like it? Well, enjoy it, because you earned this. Mm-hmm. We're stupid. We don't pay attention. We didn't pay attention to what was happening in eastern Ukraine. How many times did you listen to some army general, because I haven't heard any Marine generals over there in Europe say this sort of thing, but an army general, well, Ukrainians have mastered combined arms. I'm confident that they can crack this Russian defensive perimeter and they'll break through and end this war. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, great advice for 1942. Absolutely irrelevant today. Yeah. Every time you try to assemble somewhere within the vicinity of the target you want to attack, you're going to be destroyed. You're going to be attacked. What have the Russians done in response to all of this? Well, they've dispersed. They built enormous air and missile defense complexes. They've changed the way they organize to fight. There are no giant divisions online. They're all brigades now. And what few little divisions they have are just treated as pools of battalions that are brought forward and rotated under brigade command. And the brigades stay. It's only the battalions that rotate in and out, which makes excellent sense, because the brigades are now highly trained and they know how to execute these missions. My point is, we missed the boat, and we didn't understand that the same ISR strike connectivity and capability that we saw in eastern Ukraine devastate the Ukrainian forces is now being used to devastate us. And there's not a whole hell of a lot we can do about it.
Yeah.
Now, what's the intelligent thing to do?
The intelligent thing to do, I would assess, is to just pull out. And if we really want a war, and I'm not advocating for it, to complete the refitting of our forces for this next generation of conventional warfare. Because like you said, I mean, I've been following Ukraine very closely since it started. And, 2 data points, you already hit on one, is going back to the offensive, the failed grand offensive down in southern Ukraine. How was that, 2023? 2022,
2024. They ran offensives 2023, 2024 against Sorovikin's strategic defense.
There we go, that one. Yeah, and it was the thing that stood out to me about that was, and this is a little, put in layman's terms, maybe a little bit anecdotal, was the reputation of the Russian army is tied rhetorically and propaganda-wise here in the United States back to the way they fought the Germans during the Second World War. Where it's just, get online, assault, we don't care how many guys are killed. And then you look at how they actually operated. And these small teams controlling the high ground, defense in depth, that looked to me a lot like the way the Germans actually fought in World War II.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And again, we tend to see whatever it is we want to see as opposed to what is really there. This is not new. We did that before the First World War. On the British side, they looked at the Boer War. They said, well, the Boer War justifies light artillery that could be rapidly moved across the battlefield, positioned, and then launch direct fire attacks on the enemy. And they said, well, aimed rifle fire is the key. We've got great rifles now. We can do a lot of damage. We said the same thing after the Philippine insurrection. We'd lost 2,000 men, but we killed almost 250,000 Filipinos. We said our aimed fire is excellent, light artillery, mobility, and so forth. We show up in 1914 in the British Army. We showed up in 1918, and we lost 1,000 dead in every battle. What was wrong? Well, we had picked the wrong things, and we followed the wrong pattern. We have a habit of doing this. And I think that's what's going on right now. When we look at what the Russians have done, we look at what Iran has done, and we don't understand that the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians have all discovered the strategic defense is superior to the strategic offense. And we are purely offensive in our posture and structure. So when I said, what do? You stop. You say, okay, this is not going to work. We're going to have to do something else. So what the British did when they fought Napoleon for 20 years was they made peace when they couldn't fight anymore. And then 3 or 4 years down the line, when it became necessary, with Napoleon, was inevitable it would be because of all of his, camp he's waging, they'd fight again when they could. My point is that right now, we do not need to destroy Iran. It is not in our interest to destroy Iran. It may be in Israel's interest, and it may be viewed as being in the interest of the billionaires that are essentially shaping national policy in the White House and on the Hill, but it's not in American interest. And contrary to the terrible lies that are told on a routine basis about Iran, Iran is not the great Satan. It is not the principal terrorist state in the world. I mean, if we want to look at this region rationally, we'd go to Pakistan and bomb that place. I don't want to bomb Pakistan either. I don't think that solves the terrorist problem. We can't kill our way out of this sort of thing. So I would stop and I would say, on humanitarian grounds, we've got to suspend operations, because if we don't, this world is going to be in a state of depression for years. It may be 10 years before the global energy complex recovers. We're actually reversing the green revolution.
Yeah.
We're not growing food.
No.
It's insane. But that's not what President Trump wants to do, because President Trump is a student of Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn's rules are the rules that govern his behavior. Number one, attack, attack, attack. Attack, attack, attack. Always, always, always. Deny, deny, deny. Never, never admit anything. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. You just deny whatever is thrown at you. And finally, you twist whatever the outcome is into looking as though it's another victory for you. Regardless of what happens, you win. So I think we're going to go back. I think we're going to war. I think we're going to do a lot of damage, because in contrast to us, the Iranians have always done what they said they would do. And they've made it very clear that they will destroy the oil infrastructure in the Gulf. They'll probably hit the desalination plants, because I expect it will probably hit theirs. And the result is that the entire western side of the Gulf will be destroyed. That industry will be gone. Everything will lie fallow for years. The population will leave because it can't survive. And then what do? We go home. Job well done. What did we do after Vietnam? We went home. And I had this conversation with Dave Petraeus in 2005 when I went out to speak at the General Staff College. He said, what do you think about Iraq? I said, well, Dave, why don't we just leave? Oh, no, we can't do that. That Anbar province will become this platform for terrorist attacks around the whole world. It'll threaten the humanity. And I said, well, that's what we're going to do anyway. Eventually we leave. And why do we leave? Because we don't live there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it ultimately doesn't have much interest for the American people back home either. I mean, once people figure that out, I mean, it's why keep pouring blood and treasure into it. And Colonel Macgregor, I know we uh, only have you for a little bit. Do you have time for one or two more questions? I'm enjoying this. If you got to go, you got to go. It's not a big deal.
I do for another 6 or 7 minutes, and then I got to go. Yeah.
Perfect. And I will not keep you longer than that because I really wanted to tie this in. You mentioned BRICS earlier, and Trump just came back from China. So I really wanted to tie this into the bigger picture, right? We've got turmoil at home. We're sucked into increasingly a quagmire that risks global depression and just incredibly negative outcomes globally. So where do you think the Chinese and the Russians are going? Because Trump spent a grand total of 2 days in China. The Russians are getting ready to have a meeting there, which is going to last much longer. What do you think is going to come out of that? And how do you think BRICS is going to try and advance the ball coming out of that meeting?
Well, this is a seminar that should last at least 2 hours, but
Here we go.
I'll try to give you quickie answers. First of all, I think there is some good news. And the good news is that I think Donald Trump has come to the conclusion, thank God, that the idea of attacking China over Taiwan is insane.
Mhm.
We have no chance of success doing that whatsoever. You heard him talk about 100 miles away from Taiwan, and we are 7,000 miles from Taiwan. Why would we do that? Well, thank you, Donald. God bless you. You got this right. Because if you don't like the Strait of Hormuz, you're really not going to like an attack on China. You know, there's this old expression in the Navy, a ship's a fool to fight a fort. China is the largest fort in the world. And an attack against China would make Iran look like kindergarten. So absolutely off the table. I think that's good. We just need to shut up all these people who want to talk about going to war with the Chinese. The other thing is the Chinese are not interested in war, never have been. They're not a martial people with a martial culture. And everybody confuses them with a totally different animal. And Japan is still a very martial culture and views all these things very differently from China. But I think what we've got to expect right now is BRICS is going to grow like topsy very rapidly. The reserve currency is now gold, not the dollar. Gold is going to certainly be the principal way that they will back currency in the BRICS environment. China has purchased tons and tons and tons of gold. How much have they got? Certainly more than they admit to.
Right.
And they have opened a vault in Riyadh. They've opened a vault in Hong Kong. They're prepared to do business in gold, particularly when it comes to energy. And that's one of the reasons why now people are saying, well, we're going to do business in yuan because it's backed by gold. So I think we've lost that particular battle. I mean, it's all over but the crying. The next thing is that it did not rob us of our manufacturing base. China did not hold a gun to our heads and try to steal our agricultural land. People need to wake up and understand, if you don't like the fact that the Chinese can come into the United States and buy up agricultural land, well, then pass a law that they can't. It's our country, idiot. We can protect it. We can stop. You know, you don't like Chinese coming into the United States? Fine. Embargo it. Stop it. You know, I remember, you know, Chaz Freeman, Ambassador Chaz Freeman, somebody that you should bring on as well.
Okay.
And he told me the story because I think at the time he was the interpreter. And this involved Jimmy Carter when he went to visit with Deng Xiaoping. And Carter, of course, was beating everybody over the head about human rights. And he said, well, you know, you won't allow your citizens to leave the country. And so Deng Xiaoping looked at him and he said, well, Mr. Carter, how many Chinese would you like? 30 million? 40 million? 50 million? End of discussion. He shut up. We need people at the top who are realistic, who are preeminently concerned with the country we have and the citizens that are in it. And that's the problem right now. Nobody's terribly interested in us. We're last on the list because we don't pay off very well. There's no money in us. Money is elsewhere. That's the problem in Washington, D.C. The Americans will figure it out, but not until the pain is much worse. And I predict that that's coming. So what are Russia and China going to do? They're going to cooperate because they have what's the right word? I'm trying to symbiotic relationship. China needs all the oil and gas, minerals, and products that they can create, agricultural products, because China has only about 15% of its land is really arable. And the Siberian tundra, not the tundra so much, but a little further south, all of that soil is no longer permafrost. So you're looking at very, very fertile farmland. So the Siberia can become a huge garden that produces vegetables and other foodstuffs for China. They're building more pipelines down to China.
Right.
China and Russia are cooperating because it makes sense to do so. A war between those two countries is absurd because it makes no sense. Now, here's something else that Americans don't understand. China and Russia both have a shared interest in ensuring that Central Asia is stable. Now, why would that be? Because the last time Central Asia was ignored, there was a man named Genghis Khan. And Central Asia became the dominant force on the planet. No one should underestimate Central Asia. There are tens of millions of people there. Making sure that they live within stable societies and have a good standard of living is in everybody's interest. The Russians are actually more popular there than the Chinese are. So the Russians are far more capable of helping to maintain order there than the Chinese are. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, that's true. So I think you have a Eurasian theater complex, whatever you want to call it, that's emerging. I think India will eventually join it, as will Pakistan. Iran is already a member. It just hasn't been completely connected, but it's part of the Belt and Road. And all of these states and nations are civilizations that previously traded heavily for thousands of years. You know, the same thing is true when you look at Germany. What I think Putin has done, probably longer than everybody would like, has waited for the government in Berlin to change. It's about to change. And what does Aliza Weidel, the leader of the Alternative for Germany, say? We've got to buy cheap energy from Russia. Of course, for 300 years, Germany was Russia's principal trading partner, and Russia was Germany's principal trading partner. It makes sense. We act as though the world will end, and there are fools in this country that will say, well, we should fight to stop that. It's insane. Makes no sense at all. So when World War I broke out in 1914 in August, Russia and Germany were each other's #1 trade partner. When war broke out on 22 June in 1941, the Soviet Union and Germany were each other's principal trading partner. I think they've figured this out. It's natural, and it should be viewed as something inherently positive as opposed to negative. But you have to change your worldview. And for somebody like you or me, you know, we served in the military. Call me back in 3 months. I think you're going to answer this question decisively in the favor of yes, Americans are waking up. But that will be because of the pain that they are feeling. Now, that's the first thing. Second thing is too much of a chokehold. Well, a chokehold can work if you are in a position to threaten someone's life. But otherwise, if it's only money, even though obviously people in Washington are very, very interested in lining their pockets and enriching themselves, we understand that. But at some point, the money is not enough if your political survival is at risk. We just don't know how bad it's going to get, but I think we can say with some certainty two things. Number one, President Trump is going to restart the war against Iran. Everyone who has looked at the energy complex, I'm talking about the global energy complex, the availability and distribution of energy in the form of oil and gas and so forth. Add to that everything from fertilizer and aluminum to helium. These things, and feedstock in terms of crude oil that is extremely, in order to keep your refineries operating, and extraction. You know, if you can't extract oil, if you've run out of space for storage and you no longer extract, then you have to restart wells. That's a tedious and time-consuming process. If you look at that right now, I think we're headed into a global disaster. For much of the world, it will turn into a global depression. For us, the best outcome is a deep recession, but there's also the potential for a depression here. That has to do with our fragile economy, what we discussed before. So that's the first part. Second part is we don't know how many others in the world are going to react to this reckless decision to attack Iran. It looks as though BRICS is gaining tremendous momentum. It looks as though more and more countries are aligning themselves, frankly, with China, Russia, and Iran. And I would include India in that particular category and many, many more. When you start adding up the population, if you look at India, China, that's a pretty substantial chunk of humanity. Then you add in Southeast Asia, kick into this countries in the Middle East, North Africa, Central Africa. Very shortly, you're talking about most of the world. So I worry about that because I think that Donald Trump, not intending to do so, obviously, has created conditions for the emergence of new alliances around the world directed against us.